안녕하세요. 미국 주식으로 온 대학이 미준입니다. 오늘은 미준 패밀리님들이 정말 깜짝 놀라실 만한 멋진 컨텐츠 하나를 준비했습니다. 여러분들 미준 채널 그러면 어떤 종목이 떠오르시는지 모르겠습니다. 제가 볼 때는 미준을 대표하는 미국 주식 종목은 엔비디아가 아닐까 이렇게 보는데요. 오늘은 엔비디아에 관심이 있으신 분들, 그리고 엔비디아에 투자하시는 분들께 굉장히 소중한 시간이 될 것 같습니다. 엔비디아의 CEO 젠슨 황이요. 드디어 세계 최초의 자서전을 내놓는데요. 이 자서전을 쓴 작가 이름이 스테판 위트입니다. 그리고 오늘은요, 스테판 위트가 드디어 미주온 채널에 독점 출연을 했거든요. 그래서 오늘 방송에서는 스티븐 위트를 모시고 과연 엔비디아의 CEO 젠슨 황은 어떤 사람인지, 그리고 엔비디아라는 기업이 가지고 있는 가치는 얼마나 대단한지 이분의 의견을 직접 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 참고로 스티븐 위트는요, 무려 3년 가까운 시간 동안 젠슨 황과 밀착 취재를 했고요. 정말 많은 분들, 기업 내에 있는 내부자들과 많은 대화를 통해서 엔비디아에 대해서는 정말 최고의 인사이트를 우리한테 안겨줄 수 있을 것 같습니다. 자, 그러면 정말 특별하게 준비된 미준 특별 방송 바로 시작합니다. I would like to welcome you to Mijun YouTube channel. We are a group of Korean investors focusing on US stocks, especially Nvidia. So I'm very sure that a lot of my subscribers are keen to find out what kind of insights you will be delivering today during our interview. Please, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. My name is Stephen Witt. I'm a journalist, a business journalist based in the United States in Los Angeles. I've written a lot about technology and large corporations. And in 2023, I was given the opportunity to profile NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, for the New Yorker magazine. That turned into this book. Jensen is maybe the most dynamic CEO I've ever met. And I've interviewed a lot of CEOs, so it's really impressive, just his level of intelligence, work ethic, and especially his perspective on things.
That's great.
I should mention, I used to be an investor myself, so I
Ah,
understand investing quite well. I worked for a hedge fund for a while.
so do you happen to have Nvidia stocks now?
No, I used to way back in the day. So when I started my career and I worked in finance, in my personal account, I actually bought Nvidia, and it was a terrible investment. This was back in the graphics cards days in the early 2000s.
All right.
And I just got tired of looking at it go up and down and never really accumulating anything in value. And I sold it in frustration, probably around 2005, 2006. And for a long
Oh,
time, this actually looked like a smart play because Nvidia did not really take off until 2014. So,
yeah.
in 2009, 2010, I could have bought it back for much less, actually. So I thought I was smart in selling it for a while. But I never got back in. And then I bet you know what happened then.
Yeah.
You know the rest of the story.
Sure. Let's talk about your book. I really enjoyed reading The Thinking Machine. I was quite impressed by your exceptional storytelling and a great deal of research. I heard you spent 3 years shadowing Jensen Huang and interviewed over 300 key insiders. Were there any particular challenges or memorable episodes?
Sure. It wasn't quite 3 years. It was more like 1 year,
Oh,
just to be clear. But I did interview a very large number of people. Um, the thing that always sticks out in my mind as being memorable, if you've watched Jensen on stage at GTC or other conferences, you know he's a great presenter. He's fantastic. Much better, actually, than your average CEO of
yeah.
a large corporation, who usually tend not to be very good on stage. Um, and I was backstage with Jensen. He gives a lot of presentations, and he was going to present to a room full of building designers, a room full of architects, maybe 400 people. And so this is just totally meaningless. This is a totally meaningless presentation he's given. He's probably given a presentation like this 1,000 times.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting backstage with him, and he starts to kind of rock back and forth on his feet.
Hmm.
And he starts to talk very fast, and he starts to make a lot of jokes. And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, oh my God, Jensen is nervous. He's nervous
Uh-huh.
to go out there and talk to 400 people. He's got like anxiety. And he had said this to me, like, I hate public speaking. And I was like, what are you talking about? You're great at public speaking. But he does. And he gets really nervous before he goes on stage.
Oh,
And then, he went out there and he did a great job. And then later I saw him in person at GTC 2024, and that was like 17,000 people. He did a great job there too.
yeah.
But, he doesn't like to do it. And I kind of realized about Jensen, he's totally afraid of like bombing. He's afraid the audience is going to get bored. And so a lot of what he does is to sort of, watch the audience and make sure they don't get bored.
I see.
It's very funny to see that human side of him.
I mean, maybe that makes him a great presenter because he cares how the audience is reacting and if his story is interesting enough for them. And
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that's so fascinating about Jensen. It's also what makes him a great CEO. He's not, some CEOs you meet, they're going to go conquer the world, right? It's all ego for them.
that's true.
Jensen is a little different. He's afraid of NVIDIA failing. He's afraid of NVIDIA losing money and not being all that it could be. And he's afraid that there's some wave of technology that will arrive that he doesn't participate in. So more so, I think, than any other CEO I've ever interviewed, Jensen is driven by negative emotions, by like fear and guilt. It's really true. And you wouldn't know this until you get close to him and kind of see it. So like he wakes up in the morning to go to work and he's almost instantly thinking about the competition. Like what could go wrong? What might happen that will cost NVIDIA's share price and cause the stock to go down? And this is really what motivates him, these fears. It really works for him. I think it's a hard way to live, though.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how he does it.
So very careful person, or maybe almost perfectionist then. Yeah, he cannot let anything go
Extremely.
wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, extremely perfectionistic, neurotic, like very worried about what's going to happen, paranoid. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but there was a famous book by Andy Grove, who built Intel. And the name of the book this was his memoir. It was Only the Paranoid Survive. And that's especially true in the semiconductor industry, right? In the microchip industry, because there's so much competition. You have to reinvent your product from scratch, basically every few years. In fact, you have to reinvent how you build your product from scratch every few years. If I'm selling beer or whatever, I don't have to do that so often. If I'm selling, home goods or furniture, I don't have to reinvent everything from scratch every couple of years. But for microchip manufacturing, obviously with each new process node, it's a whole new ballgame. And so NVIDIA has to be very nimble. Even though they're big, they have to be really willing to kind of reinvent the whole product from scratch when the moment calls for it.
I wonder if he can sleep very well every night.
I don't know when he sleeps. He seems to be one of these guys who doesn't sleep much at all.
Yeah. Now I understand whenever there's just some kind of negative news going around about NVIDIA, he's very quick to respond. We see him all the time in media, right? So he is there, and he's talking about making a lot of excuses. And yeah, now
Yeah.
I can see how he's trying to defend his own company all the time.
Jensen, this is what I love about Jensen. He's so candid. He's so open. I interviewed Jeff Bezos once back when he was still the CEO of Amazon. And he was surrounded by lawyers and surrounded by PR executives. And he had a script and he was going to stick to a script. And if I tried to go off the script, then the lawyer would come in and start yelling at me. And so I got nothing out of this interview. With Jensen, it's totally the opposite. He was willing to talk about almost anything, say almost anything. He's really open and candid and so intelligent. And I think this is one of NVIDIA's great strengths, is that if something goes wrong at NVIDIA, he's not going to hide it. He's not going to try and not let people know. He's going to be very forthright and open about what's happening and what's going wrong.
I see.
And so I think this is something Jensen really stays on top of. Yeah.
So he's a very open and transparent person. Then what about his leadership style? From years of observing him, how would you summarize Jensen Huang's leadership style? Possibly in one word, what would it be?
Yeah, he's like a cult leader, okay? He's almost like a prophet. He's like a religious figure to his employees, okay? Because, he's very loving and kind to all of them. He's also very mean.
Yeah,
to
is it?
all of them. Yeah, he will scream at them if they don't perform according to his standards, or sometimes even almost out of nowhere, he'll start screaming at them. On the flip side, when something goes wrong, he's very understanding and gentle. When people try and leave, like I was talking to one employee, he managed maybe 10 people way down the chain, way down the hierarchy at the bottom. And he decided he was going to leave to go to the startup. And Jensen comes and he's begging this guy not to go. He's compassionate. He's like, don't leave NVIDIA. And the guy's like, this is crazy. I didn't even think Jensen knew my name. I didn't even think he knew who he was. And now he's like, the CEO of the company is begging me not to leave. But Jensen also has such a great track record now of making predictions about the future. And those who were loyal to Jensen, those who believed in him, now have hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And so it has paid off to be loyal to Jensen, and everyone sees that. So at this point, he's almost like a prophet. He's like a religious figure. If I had to use one word, like his employees worship him.
Yeah.
I think they would follow him out of the window of a skyscraper if he saw a business opportunity there.
Yeah, that is great to hear as an investor. I can see that he understands people do not work for company. People work for people, right? So I think he knows that simple agenda.
I would say in NVIDIA, it's even more than this. Yes, they work for people, but they work for the vision. NVIDIA, we can argue, is the most important technology company in the world.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. And maybe there are others, but they're right up there. Certainly the most important hardware company in the world. And even those people who have been with Jensen and they have 500 million, maybe even $1 billion, they can't leave. Not because they need the money, not even because they love Jensen, although they do. They can't not be present for this technological revolution that's happening. They have to be at the front lines. They would regret it. A psychic opportunity cost to not participate in the AI revolution would be too high for them. Remember, these are inventors, software engineers, hardware engineers, and technologists. This is the story of the age. They're writing history. They have to be there. The money, in a sense, is really a secondary concern right now. Even Jensen, his personality is a secondary concern. They have to be in the middle of this. They'll never be able to sleep if they're not there.
So they want to be a part of history, right?
Yeah.
It is like becoming an employee at Apple maybe 20 years ago.
Exactly. And NVIDIA is still, it's still accelerating. In some ways, perhaps we are only at the very beginning of AI, I think. And so what's going to happen next is even wilder, I think.
Okay, we will talk about AI revolution a little bit more details later. When it comes to Jensen, I have one particular question I always wanted to ask if I ever have a chance to meet with him, but maybe you have the answer. Do you know the strategic or symbolic reason why Jensen Huang always appears in public wearing a black leather jacket?
Yes. So Jensen did not always do this.
No?
If you go back and you watch NVIDIA tape from the 2000s, he's dressed normally, kind of just in a shirt or slacks. He doesn't even dress particularly well, actually. His clothes look a little cheap. His daughter and his wife gave him a makeover.
Oh.
Okay. His daughter and his wife said, Dad used to have to start kind of like dressing better. And she was working at Louis Vuitton, the big kind of French fashion company as an intern. I think she got really into fashion. Jensen's wife, Lori, dresses very nicely. She's got a very nice wardrobe. And so I think they sort of pushed Jensen to dress a little better. And at the same time, his company is pivoting from graphics cards for video games. And, video game guys, they're not known for their wardrobe. They're not going to dress that great. Into AI. And suddenly now he's got to become maybe a more sort of iconic figure in technology, right? He's the opportunity. Steve Jobs had an iconic wardrobe, but he'd passed away from cancer. And this kind of left the spot open to be like the guy who dresses. But, Jobs had picked out his wardrobe. He'd sort of like keyed in on a couple pieces and picked them out, and then he wore them every day. With Jensen, it's a little different. He's an engineer. He's going to A/B test his wardrobe. He's going to swap in different pieces and see if they work with what he wants to do and swap out others. So he's not quite wearing the same clothes every day. If you look carefully, he's always making little subtle changes to it
Yeah.
as he attempts to perfect what his look is going to be.
All right.
He dresses in a lot of designer wear, like the leather jackets he wears. They cost $5,000 to $6,000. They're quite expensive.
Yeah.
But I think he's mostly settled on what he wants to look like now. I will know that Jensen is nearing retirement when he stops dressing this way.
Okay.
I don't know if he can wear the leather jacket when he's 70, when he's 80. Maybe he will. I think at some point, Morris Chang, Morris Chang?
Yeah.
Morris Chang at some point started wearing like these big corded sweaters. And that's how you knew he was getting close to kind of like retirement age.
All right. Okay.
When Jensen starts wearing sweaters everywhere, that's when you'll know.
I think it's working because in the beginning I was thinking, why this guy is always wearing black leather jacket? Now I find it quite cool.
I think what he was trying to signal, it can't be a coincidence. He wore that leather jacket on stage, that particular leather jacket on stage. Like he experimented a little, but the look that we associate with Jensen was really unveiled or debuted at GTC 2014. His 2014 GPU technology conference, where he interviewed Elon Musk on stage. And all they talked about was AI.
I see.
And this was when Nvidia made the pivot from video games to AI.
I see.
And I think he wore the jacket. I think the point of the jacket is to communicate to investors and the media and the public, hey, we're a different kind of company. And I think that worked.
It makes sense. The Nvidia already made a bold bet on parallel computing in the late 90s. Can you explain in details the rationale behind this decision? Because before that, everybody was working on CPU. Nobody was really interested in GPU. What kind of insight did they have when they made that decision?
Yeah, so briefly, the CPU model does one math problem at a time. The GPU or parallel model splits that math problem into a bunch of small math problems and then executes those all at once. So that's the parallel approach. Now, the parallel approach is much faster, but it is much harder to program. It requires a lot more from the computer programmer. So for many years, people had experimented with parallel solutions, but they had never been able to get customers to use it because it put too many demands on the programmers. And so, like, for example, I was talking to parallel computing specialist Bill Dolly, who formerly was the chairman of Stanford's computer science department. And he said programmers had a choice, right? They could rewrite 1 million lines of code, or they could just wait. They could just wait for Intel's CPU to double in speed following Moore's law. So as long as Moore's law was in effect, nobody was going to really use a parallel computing solution simply because it was just too difficult. It was too hard, and nobody wanted to do the work of rewriting all of that code. The insight that really pushed NVIDIA into using GPUs and parallel computers in the 90s was that the demand for 3D graphics was infinite. No matter how good, no matter how well we rendered the video game, there was a certain kind of customer who always wanted better graphics and would pay anything to get it. No matter how much computing power we supplied to that particular segment of the market, they were almost going to always demand more. And that was very unusual. There are very few applications for which that was true. Let's move to the mid-2000s now. They've established themselves, NVIDIA. Okay. They've established themselves as the leading provider for this bleeding edge customer who's going to always demand more computer graphics, okay, better computer graphics. And now they're saying, well, what's another application that has that same demand profile where there's so much need for computing power that no matter how much we supply, the customer is going to always come back and ask for more. Infinite demand. Where else are we going to find that? And really, there's not that many spaces, actually. It's mostly just science. Okay. And so they went out to scientists and they were like, hey, do you want to use our parallel computing solutions? And the scientists basically said, nah, we don't want to. We don't want to write 1 million lines of code in parallel. We already have our models. We already have our systems. It's not going to work for us. And so this was always the sticking point. But NVIDIA had a special insight. And that insight was that Moore's law was going to come to an end. And the reason Moore's law was going to come to an end was because of basic principles of physics. Moore's law was going to run into the physical limits of the universe. The components on the chips got smaller and smaller and smaller. They were getting like 10 atoms in width, or even like 1 atom in width. And as they get so small, Moore's law begins to break down. Actually, a principle called Dennard scaling that no longer holds true. The transistors, they start to leak electricity. They become compromised as they get so small.
I see.
And Nvidia and Jensen in particular saw this happening. And they said, when this happens, when the transistors get down to 10 atoms of width or below, Moore's law is going to break down. And programmers will be forced to use these parallel computing solutions. They will have no choice. The million lines of code putting that off that they don't want to rewrite, now they'll have to do it. They'll have to do it because the laws of physics will force them to. And Jensen bet the whole company on this, basically. This was NVIDIA's big bet.
I see.
AI came along, and this turned out to be true, and they moved all the AI to the parallel computing platform. So this was kind of really Jensen's insight. It's kind of 3 stages. First, they see that the demand for computer graphics is infinite. Second, they see that there's physical limits for the universe. And then third, they see that the demand curve for AI is the same as 3D graphics, right? AI, it's just like graphics. No matter how much computing power we supply to the AI, the customers are always going to come back and ask for more. In fact, they'll ask for 10 times more as soon as they see what the AI can do. We're living through that right now. It's why NVIDIA is such a large company. We can't supply the AI customers or the AI developers with enough computing power. No matter how much computer power we throw at that, they're going to come back and ask for more. It's just like 3D graphics. And so that turned out to be the second application with that profile.
I see. So basically, it was Jensen Huang's insights to realize Moore's law has a physical limitation. That was the main insight he was utilizing to bet on the parallel computing system then.
That was the main one, yeah.
I see. Amazing. Now, as an investor, we talked about different strengths NVIDIA has, but usually when it comes to the real difference between NVIDIA and other competitors, we always talk about CUDA. So CUDA is often considered as NVIDIA's strongest moat. Could you elaborate on the role the CUDA plays in the company's competitive advantages?
Yes. So NVIDIA makes microchips. That's metal. That's the silicon layer. Okay. Up here we have the programmer. In the middle we have many intermediate layers of computer code. Okay. And CUDA lives here in the middle. It runs on top of the metal, on top of the silicon, but it kind of ends sort of before the programmer would necessarily directly interface with it. So it's kind of the intermediate or even lower level code. NVIDIA has 10,000 software programmers working for them, optimizing this CUDA stack. Now, what is it? Well, it's a platform for scientists and other researchers to access these parallel computing structures and make their workflow go 10 or even 100 times faster. And so NVIDIA has built this enormous scientific computing application or contraption or layer that exists kind of at the lower level of the code where a lot of programmers don't operate. So if I'm a guy trying to do weather forecasting, or if I'm a guy trying to do, let's say, physics simulations, I'll come and I'll be able to easily access these complicated parallel computing structures that are hard to use using this CUDA platform. Initially, NVIDIA pitched CUDA to kind of like scientists, right? Like I said, weather forecasters, oil prospecting, physics simulations. And they didn't consider AI to be a particularly important use. If you look at when they were rolling out CUDA, and CUDA was first kind of debuted in 2006, for 8 years, they really struggled to find their kind of like most important customer. And if you look at the marketing literature from the early days, they don't mention AI at all, not once. And so that came as a surprise to NVIDIA that CUDA would turbocharge these AI workflows so much. But when the neural network guys started using it, they found it would speed up their applications, not by 10 times, not by 100 times, but by 1,000 times, 1,000 times speed up. And that's what really makes the contemporary AI revolution possible. It's this CUDA code. that
I
does that.
see. I see.
And this was actually, the math they use is something called matrix multiplication. Basically, you take two giant grids of numbers and produce a third one. The rules for doing this, the math is actually quite simple. But as the size of the grids gets larger, the number of computations you have to do explodes. And so CUDA turned out to be fantastic at dealing with that very high computational load. And the matrix multiplication, that's the key mathematical operation for AI. That's the thing the AI needs to really function. If you think of our brains, we're altering our neurons with chemistry. The neural network is altering its neurons with a matrix multiplication. So it kind of plays the same role. And speeding that up turned out to be critical for the AI workflow. And that's really what CUDA does. Well, here's what happened. They were trying to sell this. So they would go to like the climate modeling guys, so the weather forecasting guys. And they would say, you got to use this parallel computing platform. It'll go 1,000 or 100 times faster than the CPU. And the weather forecasting guys are like, yeah, but then I have to rewrite 1 million lines of code, and I don't want to do that. So get out of here. And so basically for like 6 years, CUDA was not a success. It wasn't quite a failure, but it wasn't doing very well. And then the AI guys came along, and the AI guys didn't have any legacy code. They had nothing. They were building this platform from scratch around NVIDIA's hardware. And so they didn't have that problem. They didn't have to go write 1 million lines of code. They were kind of building from scratch. And they built it from scratch all around NVIDIA's stack. And so once they did that, suddenly, the problem of, oh, this legacy code that I don't want to rewrite, that goes away. And in fact, the whole platform's being built around NVIDIA's kind of hardware for the first time. And so that became the industry standard. That became the default. And if you wanted to be a top-level AI programmer, you had to know CUDA. You had to understand how it worked. You had to run Python. You had to understand Python. But you also understand how Python integrated with CUDA. And that really became, just in the same way that like Microsoft Office is the default for kind of like office work, or just in the same way that like maybe like Google Chrome is the default browser. So CUDA became the default standard for any kind of AI application you were running. And of course, CUDA only ran on NVIDIA chips, and so you had to buy NVIDIA hardware to make it work.
I mean, that statement leads to my next question, because at the moment, NVIDIA is dominating the AI GPU market with over, let's say, 80% market share. Some people say 90%, 80%, but the important thing is they are dominating. And we have the second best company trying to catch up. I'm talking about AMD. How would you assess AMD's efforts to catch up with NVIDIA in the AI market? Do you think they have any chance? And where do you see the technical strengths and weaknesses between the two?
They have done poorly. They have not made any significant inroads yet. And, people who have experimented with switching away from NVIDIA to AMD don't give good grades to AMD. They find it difficult to use. AMD is cheaper. It's the cheaper solution, right? And so you think, well, why don't they switch there? But these margins that Jensen earns in NVIDIA, he puts a lot of that back into a world-class R&D department that's constantly continuing to speed up workflows for CUDA. And so, if you switch out of that, suddenly you're missing out on these important speed ups that Jensen's going to unveil. AMD's CUDA competitor is something called ROCm. It's an open source solution, and it's really always 2 or 3 years behind. And I think the AI guys just can't afford that. They can't afford not to be on NVIDIA. They can't afford to wait around for the open source community to catch up with what NVIDIA's CUDA department is doing. And so I think this makes the switching cost just too high. Look, people want to switch, right? NVIDIA's stack is expensive. It costs a lot of money. And a lot of CFOs at AI companies and other companies would prefer there to be a competitor. But I just don't think that a realistic competitor to CUDA has arrived. The other thing we should talk about is we have CUDA, and then what runs on CUDA, even kind of at the next level, is NVIDIA's software development kits, SDKs. Jensen calls these his treasures. And basically what these are are tools for scientists to use across all sorts of domains. I think there's 300 of these things: quantum physics, medical imaging, weather forecasting, graphics work, high-end graphics work, neurology, brain scanning, okay? And then, of course, AI, which is the big one. Jensen and his team of software engineers are constantly out there on the front lines talking to researchers at the world's leading research problems, the world's hardest problems, the hardest problems in computing. And they're asking them, what can I build for you today that will make your workflow go 100 times faster tomorrow? And this is really Jensen's secret. He will go and build that stuff and he will lose money to do it.
Mm.
He will assign 100 crack programmers to build an application that maybe 50 people in the world are going to use. He will lose money to do it because he always wants to be the default solution for the world's hardest programming problems. And this is actually how he got to AI in the first place. It was almost like an accident, right? Or it looks like an accident. But you know that Jensen's always going to be there at the front lines. He would go to these like quantum physicists with these complex questions, and he would build them computing stacks, and then like 10 people would be using it. And Wall Street and his investors would say, what are you doing? You're losing money supplying this guy. It was very hard for him to do this, but this is his secret. And in fact, as I reveal in the book, if you go back and look, he has been doing this since his 20s. Even before he founded Nvidia, this is what he was doing. He was always the guy who would go to the most complex customer and try and solve their problem. That's Nvidia's secret. It's what makes them so hard to compete against. AMD just can't do that as well, and other firms struggle to do it too. If you ask the chip designers at Nvidia, they will tell you, you know what? Here's the truth. AMD can design a microchip just as well as we can. Anybody who wants to can pry the lid off our chip and use a microscope and look at the circuits. It's not a secret what the circuits are doing. We can't keep that a secret. What our trade secret is, and where our real competitive advantage comes from, our dialogue with scientists and our ability to build and deploy parallel computing solutions that are cutting edge. And we're doing it. We're not relying on the open source community to do it. We're going to build it first. And then they're going to try and catch up to what we just built, but they're always going to be behind.
That is very well explained. Let's talk about manufacturing side. As we all know, NVIDIA doesn't have factory. NVIDIA relies on TSMC for chip making, actually for all of their chips. Do you think this dependency could pose investment risk? What do you think?
Sure, although arguably it's more risky to own one, right? So Intel owns its own foundries and their stock price has gone absolutely into the toilet, right? It's actually less risky to outsource it. It is. I mean, empirically, it's been a very successful approach. Now, the risk, of course, is war, like geopolitical risk. What if China invades Taiwan? There's a huge risk there. And NVIDIA is already in the process of de-risking that by collaborating with TSMC as they onshore production back into the United States, into Arizona and Ohio. So I think NVIDIA they will never make a direct investment in a foundry. I don't think. They won't own their own manufacturing. They don't want to, and it doesn't make sense for them. They've proven that the asset-light model works, and this would just be a distraction. I mean, it sunk Intel. It's riskier to do the integrated thing, right? Empirically, this is true. And I think they will always do this. Now, would they use Samsung? Sure. And I think they have used Samsung in the past. There's a lot of other potential providers. A lot of foundries are coming online all over the world, right? In Japan, in Korea, in Europe, in the United States. So I think that choke point that has historically existed at TSMC in Taiwan might start to go away. But then again, Taiwan's really good at this. They're hard to compete against, and it's all they do, right? With Samsung, there's always the question that people have faced is, okay, well, Samsung, we're going to go use their manufacturing platform, but they also, they're also designing their own microchips. Like, are they going to steal our ideas?
Memory chips.
Like TSMC, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, that's right. There's another risk actually, because it is my understanding that in 2024, 42% of NVIDIA's AI revenue was contributed by four mega cap companies: Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta. So there could be another potential risk as NVIDIA's largest customers are developing their own custom chips. What are your
Yes.
thoughts on this issue?
Apple has proven to everyone's surprise that they can build their own chips, right? And I think that the M1 is a great chip, the M2 is a great chip, and I think everybody's shocked that Apple was able to pull that off. It's kind of the big accomplishment of Apple, actually. They haven't had that many significant advances besides building these chips. So it's possible that Google or Amazon or Microsoft will say, you know what? Why are we relying on Nvidia to do this? Like, we're paying them so much money. It's got to be cheaper to develop this internally. And they've attempted to deploy solutions. In fact, Google has its TPU chip, which it has attempted to build, but Google's integrated solution failed. Not a lot of people are using those TPUs. I don't even think they sell them outside of Google. It's a big competitive risk for Nvidia, sure. And I think Jensen has made this point, to make the switch, for Nvidia to engineer the switch away from the CPU to the GPU, as it did in the early 2010s, the GPU had to go basically 1,000 times faster. That was how much faster it had to go for people to start switching.
I see.
So I think to dislodge people from Nvidia's GPUs now, you have to build a solution that goes 1,000 times faster. That's pretty hard to do. It's pretty hard to beat Nvidia. You'll have to have some really fundamental breakthrough there.
I see.
And I don't know what it is. If you build something that's twice as fast as Nvidia's chip, I don't think that's enough.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Another risk could be power, energy. With a lot of AI workloads driving exponential increase in power consumption, how is NVIDIA innovating in energy efficiency? Do you have any information about this?
I mean, this is the thing. Like, yeah, actually, their chips get more and more energy efficient every year, but it doesn't matter because the demand for AI inference looks like this. It just doesn't matter. I mean, people are coming every time someone goes to ChatGPT or a similar system with like increasingly sophisticated requests, right? It used to be write me a term paper. Now it's like render all this kind of like art for me, make me look like my neighbor Totoro, right? Like Studio Ghibli character. And when you do that, it's like turning on your microwave oven and running it for an hour. It's very energy intensive thing you're asking the computer to do. The chips actually get faster and better at executing way better on a kind of like per watt basis and executing these demands every 6 months. But they can't even get close to matching the demand from the consumer and on what they want the AI to do. So teenagers and kids are using this now like constantly, just constantly. They're asking ChatGPT things like it's almost like a utility, like electricity, which is a constant demand to use it. So this creates a problem not just for NVIDIA, but for the entire AI stack and indeed the entire advanced industrial globalized economy. Because we don't currently have the power. We don't currently have the electricity generation to meet the demand. The solution realistically looks like nuclear power plants, a lot more nuclear power plants. I'm not really sure that there's any other feasible solution in the next 10 years. And I'm an advocate for wind. I'm an advocate for solar, but they haven't solved the kind of, they need better batteries. They need better storage if they're going to make that work. Now, maybe we can use AI to invent some hyper battery that makes this easier. And we are attempting to do that, actually. But barring that, we need to build nuclear power plants. It's not a popular solution. Some people hate it.
And it'll take time too.
And it's not easy. It's very expensive. And a lot of the nuclear power construction companies have been like, oh, we can build them faster and cheaper now. But I haven't actually seen concrete evidence that they can really do that. There's a lot of legal and regulatory hurdles. It's tough. It's a tough question. But my feeling is, and I'm actually an environmentalist. I think it's very important to preserve the kind of like natural environment of our planet.
Sure.
I don't think we should, overrun the earth with coal plants. I think that sucks. I like nature.
Sure.
But I do also think that we can't just say, well, we'll never increase electricity power generation ever again. We have to stop it here, and then industry has to accommodate that. I think, I think even wearing my environmentalist hat, realistically, we have to supply more power to more people. I mean, even without AI, India's industrializing rapidly, right?
Yeah.
Are you going to tell them they can't have air conditioning? It's like 100 degrees there. No, they're going to want air conditioning, right? So the power demand already looks like this. So we have to find some kind of solution.
Of course. And maybe it could be an opportunity for Nvidia then, because if a power shortage becomes real, people will try to find the best efficient chip, and that is Nvidia's GPU. So the popularity will go
in
up.
terms of power efficiency, it's actually one of the best chips. It's just that our demands as a society for AI now are just, everyone's going to want it, I'm sure of it. We can't say no.
Sure. Let's talk about the brand new issues we have at the moment, Trump tariffs and US-China tech competition. Do you happen to know what measures NVIDIA has put in place to address these challenges?
Yeah, well, the biggest one is that Jensen, who has not previously been very involved with politics, is now suddenly very involved with politics.
Yeah.
In fact, he's following Trump around. And I think he's probably kissing his ass. NVIDIA, because that's how you get Trump to do things, right? Not because Jensen's a bad person, but Jensen approaches everything like an engineering problem. And he will approach the ego of Donald Trump like an engineering problem. What are the inputs and the outputs? What do I have to say or do for Donald Trump to get what I want in the end? What NVIDIA wants in the end. And so briefly, what NVIDIA wants, obviously, is not to pay tariffs on imports. One. And two, to have the export ban for sale of chips to mainland China lifted. Those are two critical things for NVIDIA. And three, they'd like to complete more corporate mergers, which was blocked under the Biden administration. So those are kind of the big three. NVIDIA tried to buy AMD in 2020. And if they had succeeded, if they hadn't been blocked by regulators, they would be by far the most valuable company in the world right now. And the fact that that merger was blocked actually cost shareholders a fair amount of money.
You mean ARM?
I'm sorry, not AMD, ARM. ARM.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, of course, ARM Holdings is what I meant. Jensen is becoming a political actor. Now, as far as I can tell, Jensen's never expressed a political opinion out loud in his life. Like, he doesn't donate money to politicians historically. He doesn't really offer political opinions about things. He tends to just do what they say. But he will always find a way to make sure it's leveraged to NVIDIA's benefit. So, for example, with the mainland China thing, they're banned from selling chips to China. Over the last year, they've sold quite a lot of chips to Malaysia, a suspicious number of chips to Malaysia, more than Malaysia would seem to really need. And recently, I think a month ago in Singapore, the law enforcement there busted a ring of smugglers who were reselling these chips that were supposedly going to Malaysia into mainland China. And so this casts a lot of what we've seen reported this year in a different light. For example, DeepSeek, was it really trained on the old NVIDIA chips? Or was DeepSeek managing to secretly source a bunch of advanced NVIDIA chips, and all of this is just a cover story? I think we have to ask those questions. Within the United States, this is a big political football, and it's very important for NVIDIA stock price. Jensen's going straight to the top, right? So he's not going to try and talk to legislators. He's just going to try and get Trump to lift the ban. Meanwhile, a lot of legislators are trying to enforce the ban more strictly. So, for example, a bill was just introduced in the United States to put location tracking devices on NVIDIA's chips so that those chips, they would know where they were going and physically see where they were at any time. And so they couldn't do this kind of thing that there seemed to be kind of Jensen's looking the other way when he sells chips to Malaysia. He's saying, I don't know where they're going to end up. I don't believe that's true. I think Jensen does know where they're going to end up, or at least he has a pretty good guess of where they're going to end up. But he's not technically breaking the law. And so this is kind of, this is Jensen's big political push, his big lobbying effort. The second thing I have observed is, Trump was making a lot of noise about tariffs, but most of it turned out to be noise, or it seems like that right now. And when it really looked like the tariff regime was going to go into place, the U.S. stock market went like this. And then when he kind of backed off, it went like this. Trump is erratic and crazy and an unusual figure historically, politically. But I do not think he will take actions that make the U.S. stock market go down.
Sure.
I just don't think he has it inside of him. I think he's too tied into the business and financial communities in the United States to, no matter what he says, he was going to he was arguing with kind of head central banker in the United States. And that made the U.S. bond market really skittish. The bond market started to go.
Yeah.
And when Trump saw the bond market start to shake, he backed off. So maybe the U.S. bond market will save democracy.
Yeah. Only months ago, he said himself, there's no Trump put, right? Now,
Yeah, there's no Trump put.
now
Yeah.
he's saying that buy the stock. So,
Yeah, I think Howard Lutnick, who is Trump's kind of like chief financial guy, he was formerly the head of Cantor Fitzgerald, or I think he might still be the head of Cantor Fitzgerald, this kind of very famous U.S. bond trading firm that had a lot of employees die in the 9/11 attacks. So there's a lot of like patriotism and love for Cantor Fitzgerald within the financial community. Howard Lutnick is not going to do actions that crater the U.S. stock market. He just can't. He might make some noise, but in the long term, he's not going to crater the U.S. stock market. It's very hard for any U.S. politician to do that.
yeah, sure. I believe so. In the latter part of your book, you talked about quantum computing and photonics research as future challenges. What kind of potential do you have in these areas in terms of NVIDIA's midterm or long-term valuation?
NVIDIA is not going to be directly involved in building a quantum computer. Jensen has said that out loud many times. Quantum computing is a real moonshot. And right now, we're with quantum computing where we were with classical computing, say in the 1940s. Classical computing got very lucky, by which I mean the software side, the bits, the paradigm of binary zeros and ones, was invented at Bell Labs in 1947. Separately, a completely different group of researchers in the same facility, in the same building, invented the transistor, which is the perfect hardware implication for the hardware implementation for zeros and ones. It's like a little electronic switch.
Yeah.
So those things fit together perfectly. What a great coincidence. And that's why we have such amazing computers today. Quantum computing has not been so lucky. We have, in quantum computing, instead of going from 0 to 1 directly, it's more like we're on the surface of the globe and we go from the North Pole to the South Pole. And we can take any number of paths to do that. And in fact, we can take all of those paths at once because of the craziness of quantum mechanics. We don't know what the transistor looks like for a quantum computer. We don't know how to implement this idea in hardware. And in fact, there's 10 or 11 different competing hardware applications that do so. Maybe we're going to trap ions using lasers. Maybe we're going to do superconductivity where we freeze it almost to absolute zero and then manipulate electrons. Maybe we're going to do photons to do it. And all of these competing applications are being worked on right now. And that's just scratching the surface. There's like 6 or 7 more. Well, only one of those is going to win, right? And I was trying to figure out which one was going to win. And suddenly I have one guy, and he's the PhD, he's the head of particle physics at Caltech. And he's arguing with the head of particle physics at MIT about which solution is better. I don't know which one of these two guys is right. Like, how am I supposed to know? They're both geniuses and they're arguing with each other. I don't know who's right. Like, how? I don't know. Is it going to be photonics? Is it going to be trapped ions? All I know is every person I talk to in these fields has an advanced degree from a top university and they can't agree. So for this reason, quantum computing is a very tough investment right now. Because if you back photons or if you back trapped ions or if you back superconductivity, odds are you're going to lose. There's 10 horses in the race. You're going to tell me you're going to pick the right one when these like top PhDs from advanced universities can't agree? It's very challenging to do for any kind of investor. And also it's very easy to convince yourself you have some kind of insight that you don't really have. So Jensen has steered clear of building hardware for quantum computers.
I see.
But, and this is true with AI too, Jensen is not actually the guy doing the software in the AI, right? He's building the platform. So in the US, we say in the gold rush, right? If there's a gold rush, you want to be the guy who's selling shovels.
Yeah.
You want to be the guy who's selling the pickaxes.
Yeah.
And that's what Jensen has done in AI.
Yeah.
He's the guy selling the shovels.
Yeah.
Probably true for quantum computing too. Jensen is not going to back any one of these particular horses. It's just too hard to know who's going to win. But he loves to build the software stack, right? They're all going to need to use to build this stuff because they're all going to have to go to him. So he's just going to sell these guys tools. He's going to sell them shovels. And I think he's trying to position NVIDIA to be a part of that now.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And that'll be actually easier to get involved and also have a better chance to be successful with
My advice is do not invest in quantum computing right now. It's still a science project, and you don't know which one of these companies is going to build the right one.
course.
Probably one of them will, but I don't know who, and I don't think anyone can tell you who.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
No.
What about the other technologies like you also mentioned in the book about autonomous driving, metaverse, robotics. What do you
Yes.
see in NVIDIA the future in terms of these new technologies?
So this is the great question, right? Right now, NVIDIA is a $3 trillion company. And basically that reflects investors' expectations that NVIDIA is going to be central to the AI revolution for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So that insight is captured in the valuation. It's captured in the stock price right now.
Yeah.
So that's the default. You're expecting that to happen. So how will NVIDIA, gain another $3 trillion in market capitalization? How would that happen? Well, now they have to play that same role in some other kind of revolution. Okay. And so what Jensen's looking at, there are two areas. I mean, he's all over the place. There's like 30 areas, but I would say his two areas of focus right now.
Yeah.
One is healthcare, one is medicine. And in particular, I think it's like drug discovery platforms. Now here, there's a lot of competition, right? Like you have Google's DeepMind is doing fantastic work in this role.
That's right.
But basically the idea is we're going to take the 4 nucleotide bases of RNA, right? A, C, G, and U, I think it is, or whatever it is in RNA. And we're going to turn them almost into like the zeros and ones of computing. Just as we have a compiler that crawls over our code and turns it into zeros and ones and kind of actionable stuff in the middle, we're going to take these nucleotide bases and we're actually going to do like programmable biology, where like we can use this stuff to make bespoke medicines and even like tissue, right? Even like human tissue or anything else that we want to do with it. And so this should unlock a fantastic area, a $1 trillion market of investment opportunity. Similarly, medical imaging and other things. And so Jensen is building software development kits. Remember, I mentioned his treasures.
Yeah.
This is one of the treasures that he's trying to build.
Right.
He wants himself to be in the middle of this. He wants one of his tools to be kind of like instrumental, just as CUDA is instrumental to AI. He wants you to be running your drug discovery or your programmable biology platform using an NVIDIA computer, using NVIDIA computing resources. And that would make a lot of money if that were to occur.
Yeah.
The second, and this is really, I think, Jensen's biggest focus, is robotics. I think we are just at the very beginning of what promises to be a $1 trillion investment cycle in robotics. And it's just kicking off. We're just getting started. So imagine we want a robot to do a household chore. And the one I always like to use is washing the dishes. Imagine we want a robot to wash the dishes, right? And we're going to use our AI to teach it how to do this. And we're going to use reinforcement learning techniques. Now, if we do this in the real world, if we teach our robot to wash dishes in the real world, it's going to break 10 million dishes on the way to learning how to do this, right?
Yeah.
It's very complex. So the dishes are wet. It's got to be moved very precisely. We've got to get everything off of it, but at the same time, we can't press too hard. And there's soap. It's slippery. We're going to drop a lot of stuff. It's just going to be a big mess.
Yeah.
What Jensen believes is that instead of doing this in the real world, we should create an artificial environment to do it. And Jensen calls this the Omniverse.
Yeah.
What the Omniverse is a very high fidelity physics simulation of our world. So we recreate the dishwashing environment in code, like in a physics engine. We recreate the sink. Only now, instead of doing it in the real world, we're trying to model the complex kind of like fluid dynamics and surface tension and everything we need to do, the fragility of the dishes in code. It's very hard and complex to do. But if we do it successfully, then the robot can break 10 trillion dishes and it just doesn't matter, right?
Sure.
We don't have anything to clean up. There's not water anywhere. So the idea is the robot learns at 10 million times speed in this physics simulator how to wash the dishes. And then once the brain is trained, once the AI is trained, we download that into a real world body and deploy it in your house to wash the dishes for you. Now, I think you can see if this ends up working, that's a lot of money for NVIDIA, right? People will be paying to use Jensen's basically high fidelity digital gymnasium. And Jensen likes this because it's very costly to develop. It's very hard, and there's not a lot of people doing it. Right? That's Jensen's favorite thing. Something that's very hard to develop, something that's very, small market at first. You have to lose a lot of money for a long time before you ever make any money off of it. But if you succeed, then you're kind of like a toll booth in the robotics revolution. So I asked Jensen, actually, what is the next CUDA? What's the bet that looks like CUDA did, 10 or 20 years ago? And he said Omniverse. He said this high fidelity physics simulator. So I think if you're looking forward in investing in NVIDIA, and I think I see this a lot from investors in NVIDIA, they're very focused on kind of like short-term CapEx cycles. They're very focused on who the customers are. What's the customer going to want? Or more chips or less chips. And then they ignore these huge, crazy bets. They don't talk enough about them. But imagine we were talking about NVIDIA stock in 2012 or 2013. If we were focused on CapEx cycles, if we were focused on kind of next quarter, we would totally miss the story, right? We would have had to focus on, is CUDA succeeding? Who's the marginal CUDA customer? And can that grow into something enormous? And so I think as we look at the stock today, we have to think a lot about who's the marginal Omniverse customer. Is Omniverse succeeding? Or is, these drug discovery platforms? Is NVIDIA actually succeeding in bringing people online? Because that's where the next $3 trillion in market capitalization will come, or maybe it won't.
So you see Omniverse as a second CUDA where all the robotics will train in the kind of a metaverse, right? It's kind of metaverse.
It's kind of metaverse. It's what Jensen calls it, the industrial metaverse.
I see.
And metaverse flopped, or has flopped so far. But this is not for average customers. Really, it's for training robots, right? I mean, that's the real purpose of this. And this robotics revolution is coming. And I mean, go watch GTC from last year, from this year. Jensen's talking a lot about robots. He's talking about robots all the time. And because he sees it coming, and he's correct, I think. And so he wants to be there. He doesn't want robots to be deployed. He can't. And again, this is kind of like the negative emotions, the neurosis of Jensen. He cannot not be there. He can't. The fear of missing out on the robotics revolution is what drives him. And so I'm serious. So many people, he can't not be there. It would drive him crazy.
So where do you see NVIDIA will stand as a company 10 years from now?
I have a hard time seeing what the future of humanity looks like 10 years from now. I mean, the AI, the potential applications of this stuff are so immense or crazy. It's almost difficult to understand. Google, I think yesterday, is showing AI can do original mathematics research. And there's a feedback loop there where the faster you do mathematics research, the faster the AI itself can evolve. And so you start to kind of run away with it. AI actually found a more efficient solution for matrix multiplication. Well, that's self-augmentation. Once it finds that, it starts to speed up its own training capacity, right? So it's very hard for me to predict what the next 10 years are. I really have almost no idea what the next 10 years can look like. The most optimistic scenario for NVIDIA is that they remain the default platform for training this stuff, that the demand for AI continues to increase in the way that we think it will, that the power issues are addressed, and we do start to rapidly roll back our regulations on things like nuclear power plants, or maybe we have some breakthrough in batteries or something where we can supply all this stuff. And that NVIDIA and their software team continues to be at the leading edge of this. And so in 10 years, I think also, like, let's imagine in 10 years, every car is a self-driving car. And the thing about the self-driving cars, it's a little tricky. When I make a request to ChatGPT, right, it gets taken to the cloud. The request gets taken on a data pipe to some data center at the outskirts of my city, is fulfilled, and then is relayed back to me, right? For robots and for cars, that is not a great solution.
Should be etching.
Because we need edge computing, right? We need to deploy it physically in the system. And so NVIDIA, that's another kind of like front in NVIDIA's war. They have to build a lot of edge computing platforms. They have a whole edge thing, this whole Jetson thing that they're doing. It's called Jetson. It's almost like Jensen, but Jetson. and they're trying to be on the edge too. They don't want to get beat on the edge. And so if NVIDIA succeeds, I imagine both that Omniverse would succeed, and then even in deployment for automated stuff, that Jetson is there running the edge computing side. So that's kind of two new revenue streams. One is the training stream, and then one is the deployment or inference stream, where NVIDIA is embedding chips in cars and in robots to kind of do the immediate edge processing that's needed to make it work. If the robot that's washing dishes has to co-communicate with the cloud every time it does something, there's too much lag and it'll just break the dish, right? It has to be in its brain. And so that's a huge opportunity for Jensen as well, and one that he's talked about quite a lot. So in the real world successful scenario, not only is Jensen building all the cloud infrastructure, he's actually building a lot of the edge infrastructure too. And that could be a big, I mean, they do edge computing already, but it could be a much bigger market.
Sure. That was my last question. Actually, before I started our interview, I was thinking maybe I have too many questions, but that was not the case. The time went really fast, and I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insight. Your story was really amazing. It was very interesting and insightful. I'm very sure our audience is quite impressed as well. For the last, we didn't talk about your book a lot today, so can you add some comments about your book and also any messages for our audience for the last?
Sure. I mean, this is, I think I've, the thing that this book has is I got to spend more time with Jensen than almost any other journalist. I mean, I interviewed him 6 times. I interviewed a lot of his old friends. And I also interviewed something like 60 top NVIDIA executives. And so this gave me a lot of insight into really what NVIDIA is and how it functions, which is really like a high-tech research laboratory. And also what a unique and special person Jensen is. He's difficult too. And that's in the book. I mean, there's many scenes of Jensen being very difficult in this book. He's not always an easy guy to get along with. And at one point he actually screamed at me. That's in the book too. He can be tough. But I think he's almost like the Thomas Edison of this era. He's mentioned Edison as a direct inspiration in calls. He talks about his data centers as AI factories where data goes in and intelligence comes out, right? And so that's kind of what he's building now, is these complex AI factories. I think for any investor, or really anyone who's interested in what's going on with the AI revolution, I think they'll get a lot, hopefully, out of this book. And I'm really excited, I must say, also to be publishing in Korea. It's a great opportunity for me. This is my first time publishing in Korea, so it's really exciting. I hope to get out to Korea. I've never been there. That's exciting for me. When I talk to American journalists, their questions are they all ask the same questions. They're kind of dumb. When I talk to you, your questions are so much smarter. than the American
Thank
journalist
you.
question. So it's really a privilege to be able to engage with such an intelligent and well-informed
Oh,
audience. It
my
makes me feel really
pleasure.
warm inside.
My honor and pleasure. I really wish that we keep in touch, and also maybe I can have a opportunity to invite you back to our channel in the future.
Yes, anytime, of course. I'd love to participate.
Yeah, that'll be great. All right, then. Thanks so much for insightful conversation. Also, very enjoyable time with you.
Yeah, I had fun.
I really enjoyed our time together. So let's keep in touch and see you in the future.
Okay, sounds good. Talk soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.